And so that's what the military and the party leaders worry about, is that they have lost the ability to control discussion about Taiwan in China. That some people, maybe same age as you, the so-called Funqing and others, they say, yes, it's time to bring Taiwan to the motherland, that sort of thing. And the folks in Beijing, the leaders, they can manage this because they can censor terms, they can do all of those kinds of things. But they have cultivated a deep belief that Taiwan must be brought to the motherland. And so they now are, in some ways, imprisoned by that. But my own feeling is that the bigger issues facing China having to do with how do you keep the economy moving forward, how do you address increasing economic disparity within China, across Chinese regions, but also within regions, these sorts of things, I think these will continue to dominate. The question is whether or not Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, both of whom have met leaders from Taiwan recently, whether or not they are going to be confident enough, bold enough to take any initiative to move the relationship forward. Or are they going to be in the mold of Hu Jintao and others, more cautious, just trying to keep things at bay? This is a long way of saying I really have no clue.
Why don't we open it? Oh, do you want
to take some questions from the floor?
Hi, so you just answered my question that I was about to ask. I was hoping to ask too about how the change in Chinese leadership, the mainland leadership, how that could affect cross-strait relations, but you just answered that one. So
well, I just said something. Maybe Tom would like to say something. Yeah.
Please.
On that
no, I mean I know they're not answering my emails either. So,
so I guess my other question would be, the video you showed us was about the thawing of the relationship. So what could happen? I guess my question would be, what are things that could lead to a refreezing of the relationship? I'm hoping you could answer on each side, like the American side, the Taiwan side, and the mainland side. All right, thank you.
Only something really, really unfortunate. I think that the earth has quite literally moved on this, that the status quo today is so different from the status quo 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that it would take a catastrophe of one sort, a mistake, that ending in catastrophe of some sort that would yield that sort of thing. It's hard to know. It's hard to know, what could happen. There are all sorts of possibilities. It seems that fighter jets from the two sides get a little bit close sometimes. One of those incidents, something like that could happen. There could be some other problem that would emerge. There could be any number of, some terrorist action against Chinese tourists or something. All kinds of possibilities you could dream these up, and of course filmmakers somewhere probably are. But the stakes are really too high, and you'd have to cross a really high threshold, I think, for us to go way back. Now, some people worry that the mainland now is going to collect, that the mainland expects Ma Ying-jeou to deliver, and that if Ma Ying-jeou doesn't deliver some sort of progress on the political front, not just the economic front, that would yield some pressure. But it's not in the mainland's interest right now. It's not in any Chinese leader's interest to upset this relationship. There are much bigger things at stake. And the gamble that somebody would have to be willing to take is a real punishing of trade, of all sorts of technology transfer and things like that. If something were to really change in the Taiwan Strait, the cost would be really high. And of course, it'd be a tragedy.
I would one day, one thing, yeah, I think that the leaders everywhere are glad with the outcome of this election. Even though Doug Paul might have gotten in trouble for saying it, I think it's true that Washington has breathed a sigh of relief, and in Beijing as well, because it's one less thing that they have to worry about, because they all have a lot of other things on their plate. But I also think we have to realize that Taiwan is not the only regional issue that Beijing is dealing with right now. Taiwan is a special case because it's a real, it's the central issue of sovereignty that Beijing is dealing with. But it's also dealing with sovereignty issues as regards the South China Sea. It's not the same as Taiwan is unfinished business with imperialism, but it's a question of you've got Vietnam, you've got Indonesia, you've got Malaysia, anybody, have I left anybody out? The Philippines, of course, who are also making claims over the Nansha Shisha Islands, the Paracels and the Spratly Islands, which China considers its own. So you've got a lot of debates over the law of the sea, over sovereignty, over economic zones, over security zones, sovereignty, all of that kind of stuff. Then, of course, you've got North Korea, the DPRK, which is a highly volatile issue. And while you guys are here, God forbid something might happen with the firing of the satellite in celebration of 100 years of Juche. I hope not. And then, of course, there's Central Asia, too, where you've got Iran, you've got the Arab Spring, you've got all of the things that are going on in the Middle East, some of which China has a peripheral involvement in, but some of which, and China can be a major, many of the countries are looking to China to play a role, which is not something that they're used to. And so I think, again, that there's so many things in English, or certainly in American, we have an expression, whack-a-mole. It's a type of a game where you have a lot of holes and a mole will stick its head up, and you have a hammer and you try to hit it down to solve one problem, and then it'll pop up somewhere else. And I think that everybody is playing whack-a-mole right now. And the more holes that they can seal off and the fewer moles that are going to pop up, everybody will be much happier.
I think you got a signal of this, right? When the Obama administration made that first arms sale, something that the Bush administration had initiated, military contact was cut off. There was a lot of rhetoric. When they made this most recent arms sale, there was a lot of rhetoric. Nothing else happened. We're going to punish the companies. We're going to do all these things. None of that happened. And it's because, nobody needs an additional problem. If you're worried about supplying oil that's essential for your continued economic growth, if you're concerned about all of these other issues, you don't want to mess with this.
There's three, so you can try to get a little brief. Professor Dubey, first I want to thank you for giving such a phenomenal speech about the 2012 election, and I'm from Taiwan, and it's not only very detailed but also very holistic about the campaign. Maybe the election in Taiwan is not very perfect, but we do on a way to consolidate our democracy. So my question is very simple: why do you think the DPP lost the campaign? As far as I know, that after the election, DPP tried hard to figure out why they lost, and they admit that they cannot deal with the cross-strait issue as well as the KMT. But what's your opinion? Thank you.
And I think Tom should weigh in on this. First of all, you folks are all exceedingly patient, so I'm optimistic you'll work something out on the cross-strait relationship. If you could listen to me for that long. You are patient. Why did the Kuomintang win? Why did the DPP lose? It's hard to come up with a scenario where the DPP should win in that situation. Incumbents enjoy incredible advantages. They can do things. They can make things happen. And if there's been moderate economic growth, not the growth that Ma Ying-jeou promised in 2008 when he had hamburgers and all kinds of things as his campaign, there's been moderate growth. There's been stability. There's been all of these sorts of advantages. You have the all-important United States sending signals that we're happy with the way things are. That pushes people to stick with what they know. Going into the unknown is always a challenge. But there are other issues. The DPP is obviously much younger and not, I mean, the Kuomintang has incredible financial resources. It doesn't have the party structure. It didn't even field candidates in every electoral race. So there was no way that even if the DPP won these legislative races that they entered, they still wouldn't have a majority. And so they don't have the party strength. They don't have the party organization. There's a lot of work that has to be done before they're going to be able to triumph. When they did win in 2000, it was this seminal election, and it was mostly because the blue vote, the vote in favor of stable cross-strait relation, maintaining that tie, was split. It was split between James Song and the Kuomintang candidate. So I think that's the key factor. So for the DPP to win, it has to build its party organization, and you're absolutely right, it has to come up with a coherent strategy on further developing cross-strait relations that keep the party faithful in line. They can't simply adopt the Kuomintang position. So it's going to be a challenge for them to develop that.
Question sort of directly follows that of Kevin's. There also is a question about DPP. So despite who will become the next DPP chair, what would you say that the DPP should do next? On the one hand, DPP has to cater to the economic voters to win the next election in 2016. But on the other hand, it has on its back the Tailian, like the Taiwan Solidarity Alliance, threatening to divide the Pan-Green camp if DPP were to become more like KMT. So what should the DPP do next? Like, should it adjust this? Like, it sort of relate to what you already said, but could you elaborate on that?
Nobody from the DPP is calling me for advice, so we need to be clear about that. You need to call Shelley Rigger or somebody else to offer that kind of strategy. The strategy actually that they came up with on economics was quite good. It was quite effective. The message came through, and the clearest sign that the question about equality, fairness, access, those kinds of things, the clearest sign that that message got through to voters is that the Kuomintang felt an obligation to respond to it. Even though their internal polling had them way out in front, they really weren't worried, but they still, as a defensive measure, started adopting some of these same things. And they started tailoring their, Ma Ying-jeou, in his speeches and in his press conferences, he started talking about expanding opportunity, improving on these kinds of things, and emphasizing uprightness, non-corrupt, those kinds of things. So it's clear that that's a message that has some resonance. And so that's definitely something that they should, find ways to communicate that. Now, the problem the DPP had is that it didn't have a answer to the so what question on economics. All right, when you said, you're right, inequality has increased. What are you going to do? And they didn't have a very good answer to that, a clear 5-step A, B, and C, that sort of thing. And the answer would be, well, Tsai Ing-wen's already written a book on that. Well, that doesn't work in a campaign. You can't refer people to the library.
Hello. I have two questions, one for Professor Dubey and another for Professor Gold, Thomas Gold. One is last week, the retired chairman of Kuomintang visited China and claimed that there's one China and two regions. I'd like to hear American point of view about that. Of course, there's a two China in terms of names. Second question is more of a scholarly question from Professor Gold. The reason statistical data, especially IMF and the World Bank data, has excluded Taiwan statistics, and you're a Taiwan miracle book writer, and you've included all the way historical data back to Japan occupation time. Taiwan being an independent economy, but excluded from the world as a world fourth surplus, what do you feel about it? As a researcher, I find large difficulty working on subjects like this. Thank you.
You didn't ask that question of me, but in fact, one of the interesting things that just happened, a couple weeks ago, the World Bank, together with a Chinese think tank associated with the State Council, included Taiwan in the figures, and it included Taiwan in development strategy and things like that. And so that's a signal that there is some movement on that. But you're right, of course, the exclusion from anything that you have to be a state to join, continues. What do Americans think about either one country, two regions? Another one is one country, two coasts, two coastlines, one country, two systems, all of these kinds of things. I don't pretend to speak for America on anything, and I don't know what Americans would say to that. I would respond as Tom has, that it's for the people that live on those two coasts, the people in the area, to decide this. You know that the American position, via the Taiwan Relations Act, we have a legal commitment to Taiwan. But we also have, obviously, a moral commitment. You're talking about, what does Taiwan mean? What does Taiwan represent? Taiwan represents this remarkable development story, both on the economic side and the political side. And so this is something that I spend a lot of my time doing. I'll be taking teachers, secondary school teachers from California, to Taiwan and to China, because we think that they should be including more about Taiwan in their lessons. Taiwan's economic rise is a remarkable story. Taiwan's democratization is just as amazing. And so it's something that we think people should know more about, and they should be able to differentiate between Thailand and Taiwan.
On the regional issue, one thing I would say about one country, two regions, or one country, two areas, that these are all examples of people trying things, shooting up. We say trial balloons, or running up the flagpole to see if anybody salutes. Is that immediately somebody's going to criticize and mock it, but you hope that behind the scenes there are serious discussions going on. And one of the things that I said many years ago that was worrying to me is that if Beijing said, okay, here is the outcome of cross-strait relations, now let's discuss how we're going to get there. That's the way in the 80s they would say that sort of thing. But I think now Beijing is much more open to improvising and exploring ideas, even if they can't publicly say, well, let's talk, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. I think the idea, what does unification mean, is also something that is very much in play, which I think is a healthy thing. Now, on your other question, Taiwan is a member of the WTO and of the Asia Development Bank, so some of its data do appear in those records. But also, I think Taiwan is careful to produce data along according to the same standards, so that if you are writing something or you want to compare it, you can pretty easily plug Taiwan data into the rest of that. So yes, it's unfortunate that the organizations themselves do not directly include the data, but it's there, and Taiwan produces reams and reams of data, which I think are easily accessible.
I'm afraid that the time has flown by amidst a wonderful presentation and equally stimulating conversation. So in a minute, we'll turn to informal conversations out in the common area over juice, wine, cheese, and fruit. And so our speakers will still be available for you. But I'll take the moderator's prerogative to ask one brief question. Now that Mitt Romney seems to be opening up a sizable lead in the Republican nomination contest, and we see polls showing him running neck and neck with President Obama. So, well, I mean, depending on, but now, so if Mitt Romney were to become the president of the United States, do we have any signs yet on any changes in their U.S.-China policy or cross-strait policy?
Given that prod, Mitt Romney's not going to be president. And the reason I say that, now of course things can change, and this is a discussion of cross-strait issues, but if you look at recent American political history, three incumbents have lost. Okay? So you can go back and identify these three. Gerald Ford lost. Gerald Ford was not even really an incumbent. He had never won a national election. He inherited the job when Nixon resigned. And he faced a horrible economic situation. Most of the people here are not old enough to know about win buttons, whip inflation now, and other kinds of gimmicks that they tried to come up with. But he faced a strong challenge in the primary by a very formidable politician by the name of Ronald Reagan. Okay. Now, the next incumbent to lose was Jimmy Carter in 1980. Jimmy Carter also had almost double-digit inflation to deal with, so terrible economic situation, and faced a strong primary challenge from Ted Kennedy, formidable politician. And he was defeated, of course, by Ronald Reagan. So that's the second case. The third case was the elder Bush, George H.W. Bush. In 1992, seeking re-election, he was defeated. Bad economic circumstances at the time dominated the headlines, and he faced a not-so-serious political challenge, but a political challenge from Pat Buchanan, who was a serious threat in one of the early primaries. President Obama has an improving economy, no serious challenge in the primary, and he's going to face a candidate who has some issues that he's going to have to address. Now, I think the Republicans are going to rally around Mitt Romney. You know, the people who are going to vote, the Republicans will vote for him. The question is whether or not they'll be capable of exciting other people. So the long answer is that, in fact, I don't think Mitt Romney's going to win. But Mitt Romney has been the candidate who has most consistently raised questions about China. And going back for a long time, he's run campaign ads condemning China for stealing intellectual property. And in debates and in speeches, he said, day one, I'm going to label China a currency manipulator. Now, he hasn't said what happens on day two with this, or even what it means to label someone a currency manipulator, these kinds of things. So there are a lot of certainly unknowns about this, but he's raised this. Now, the reason he's raised it is because, especially among Republicans, and especially among Tea Party Republicans, they're happy to hear this. 2/3 of those polled who identify themselves as Tea Party Republicans say, get tougher on China. Only 1/3 want to foster better relations with China. On the Democratic side, it's closer to something like 50% want good relations with China and 40% are asking for some additional toughness. Now, the polls are very clear that Americans want their cake and to eat it too, right? They want good relations with China, and they want the government to do something about what they perceive to be unfair trade practices, unfair actions that the Chinese government takes to favor exports and these kinds of things. This is a long-winded way of saying that China is in the campaign. If you go, in fact, one of the things that you can do on our website is see evidence of this. In 2010, in the congressional elections and the gubernatorial elections, there were 51 candidates who had ads about China that talked about jobs, talked about all kinds of things. And we have analyzed who won, who lost, all of that kind of information. And it's not at all clear that China is a winning campaign strategy. Beating up on China is a winning campaign strategy. In many cases, you had candidates from both sides raise these issues. China will be in the election. There's no question about it. It's already there. It's going to continue to be there. This administration, both President Obama, Secretary of Treasury Geithner, Secretary of State Clinton, they've been hammering away and taking a harder line towards China as well. So it's definitely going to be there.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So please join me in giving a hand to Clay Dubie and Tom Gold.